The scratching at Declan Thorne's cabin door came at 11:47 p.m., weak and desperate, like claws scraping wood when the strength behind them was already gone. The 40-year-old former Navy SEAL almost didn't answer. He'd been staring at the ceiling for 3 hours, watching shadows dance in the firelight, counting the knots in the timber beams overhead. The sleeping pills the VA prescribed weren't working anymore. They never worked anymore. Outside, a Colorado blizzard dumped 3 inches of snow per hour, the temperature dropping to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that kills quickly and shows no mercy. At first, Declan told himself it was the wind. February storms in these mountains had a way of making sounds that didn't exist, playing tricks on minds that already played enough tricks on themselves. But the sound came again. Deliberate, weakening, desperate. "Don't," Declan whispered to the empty darkness, his voice rough and damaged. 6 months ago, smoke inhalation during an ambush in the Hindu Kush had scarred his vocal cords permanently. Now every word scraped out like gravel over broken glass. "Don't you dare." The scratching stopped. For one moment, Declan felt relief flood through him, cold and bitter, as the wind howling outside his cabin walls. Then he heard the whimper. Low, rough. The sound a throat makes after it's screamed itself raw. The sound of something dying. A tremor ran through Declan's arms. The doctors called it service-connected disability, wrote it down in discharge papers with clinical precision. Declan knew better. This wasn't nerve damage. This was fear that had burrowed so deep into his nervous system, it had become part of his skeleton, part of his DNA. He swung his legs off the bed, still wearing the NWU Type 3 uniform he'd put on that morning out of habit. Green and brown digital camo that used to mean something. Used to mean purpose, mission, brothers who had your back. Now it was just clothing he couldn't bring himself to stop wearing, like a ghost haunting its own body. Declan crossed the small cabin in 6 steps. His hand touched the door latch and stopped. Logic said no animal would be stupid enough to approach a cabin in a blizzard. Experience said desperation makes fools of all creatures, human and otherwise. He yanked the door open. The wind hit him like a physical blow, sharp with ice and fury. Snow swirled into the cabin, stinging his face with tiny needles of frozen water. But Declan barely registered it. His eyes had locked onto the shape collapsing across his threshold. Not falling, not stumbling, collapsing. With the absolute finality of something that had just used every last ounce of strength to reach this exact spot and had nothing left. A German Shepherd, full-grown, maybe 85 pounds when healthy, though the blood made it hard to tell. Traditional working dog coloring, rich tan and black coat matted with ice and crimson. A scar ran across the right shoulder, old tissue that spoke of shrapnel or blade healed, but never forgotten. "No," Declan said. The words scraped out of his throat like broken glass. No, no, no. But even as he said it, he was already moving, already assessing, already slipping into the clinical precision drilled into him over 6 years in the teams. See casualty treat, casualty ask questions later. The dog's eyes open, golden amber, clear despite the pain. They fixed on Declan with an intensity that stopped his breath in his chest, stopped time itself for one infinite moment. Ghost, his partner for 4 years. 82 pounds of loyalty and courage, who'd cleared buildings alongside him in Fallujah and Ramadi, in a dozen other places where good men went to die. Ghost who'd detected the IED before Declan stepped on it. Who'd thrown himself between Declan and the blast because that's what partners do. Who died with those same golden eyes looking at Declan one last time and as if to say, live, for both of us. "I can't," Declan told the bleeding dog on his porch. His fingers trembled as he reached out. "I can't do this again. I can't lose." The dog's tail moved, just once. A weak thump against the snow-covered wood that somehow communicated an entire conversation without words. "I know this is hard. I know you're scared. But I'm dying out here, and you're all I've got." Something cracked inside Declan's chest. Not breaking, he'd been broken for 6 months, shattered into so many pieces he'd stopped trying to put himself back together. This was different. This was the sound of a door he'd welded shut with grief and guilt, starting to crack open despite every chain and padlock he'd put on it. "Damn it," Declan whispered. He grabbed the dog under the shoulders and dragged him inside. The shepherd was dead weight heavy in the way that meant shock blood loss system shut down. Years of battlefield medicine kicked in automatically, hypothermia, penetrating trauma, imminent cardiovascular collapse. He laid the dog on the rug in front of his wood stove, where the heat would help, but heat alone wouldn't save a life this far gone. Declan grabbed his medical kit, the civilian one he kept stocked because some habits outlived the men who formed them. Stay with me, Declan muttered, grabbing scissors and cutting through the dog's matted, blood-crusted fur. Come on, buddy, stay with me. The dog's breathing was shallow, rapid. Textbook shock. Declan worked faster. Old training steadying hands that had been useless for months. Then he found it. A bullet wound, left shoulder, entry wound clean and round about 9 millimeters. No exit wound. The bullet was still inside, lodged somewhere near the shoulder blade. Declan sat back on his heels, his mind trying to process what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't a hunting accident. This wasn't a territorial dispute with another dog or a wildlife encounter gone wrong. Someone had shot this dog deliberately with what looked like a 9 millimeter handgun, and the dog had run through a blizzard, dumping 3 inches of snow per hour in temperatures that had dropped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit with a bullet lodged in his shoulder. The question that burned through Declan's shock was simple and terrible. What was this dog running from? He pushed the thought away. Questions later, survival now. That's what his instructors had drilled into him during combat lifesaver training. Treat first, investigate second, mourn third. This is going to hurt, Declan said, his damaged voice barely audible over the crackling fire. I'm sorry, buddy, but I've got to clean this wound. He irrigated the gunshot wound with saline, his movements gentle, despite the urgency screaming in his head. The dog flinched when the liquid hit exposed tissue, but he didn't snap, didn't growl, didn't try to bite. He just pressed his head harder against the floor and endured. Like a soldier, Declan thought, and that comparison made his throat so tight he could barely breathe. He couldn't extract the bullet here. Not safely, not without proper surgical equipment and anesthesia. But he could clean the wound packet with gauze, start broad-spectrum antibiotics, and pray that was enough to keep infection at bay. You're tough, Declan said, working steadily. Tougher than you have any right to be. The dog's gaze tracked Declan's movements. Not with fear, not with aggression, with absolute trust that made Declan want to scream, want to run, want to explain to this dying animal that he was the wrong person to depend on, that everything Declan touched turned to ash and blood. But his hands kept working because that's what they knew how to do. Declan finished packing the bullet wound and moved to examine the dog's paws. Frostbite damage was immediately visible, even through the ice crusted between the pads. He started warming them carefully, wrapping each paw in towels he'd soaked in lukewarm water, knowing that warming too fast could cause more damage than the cold itself. That's when he saw it. Partially hidden beneath the matted, blood-soaked fur on the dog's chest was fabric. Not a collar, something heavier, more substantial. Declan's hands moved with sudden urgency, pulling the matted fur aside to reveal what was underneath. A tactical vest, K9 tactical vest, military issue. The kind that came with pouches for medical supplies, attachment points for leashes. The kind that Ghost had worn. The kind that marked this dog as something more than a pet, more than a companion. This was a soldier. Declan's vision blurred. He blinked hard, forcing his eyes to focus, forcing his brain to process what he was seeing instead of what he was remembering. The vest was shredded, cut with what looked like a knife or shears. Someone had tried to remove it, but they'd done it in a hurry, leaving pieces still attached to the harness underneath. "Who are you?" Declan whispered. His fingers found the identification tag pocket on the vest's left side. The Velcro was stiff with dried blood, but Declan worked it open and pulled out the metal tag inside. The words stamped into the metal made his blood run colder than the blizzard outside. Shadow MWD 8471 U.S. Military Working Dog. Jesus Christ. Declan breathed. MWD, Military Working Dog, active service or recently retired, which meant there should be records, a handler, a unit, a chain of command that knew this dog existed and where he belonged. Declan looked at the dog at Shadow with new understanding. The bullet wound took on new significance. The defensive cuts on Shadow's legs and flanks. The way he flinched when Declan moved too quickly. The absolute terror mixed with desperation in those steady eyes. This wasn't just a lost pet. This was a soldier who'd been through hell and barely escaped with his life. "What happened to you?" Declan asked, his voice so rough it was almost a whisper. Shadow's tail moved weakly. Thump, thump. Declan grabbed his phone, scrolling through contacts he hadn't looked at in 6 months. Contacts he'd been avoiding because talking to anyone from his old life meant facing questions he didn't want to answer and pity he couldn't stand to see. But this wasn't about him anymore. He found the name he needed. Commander Sterling Reeves, his former commanding officer. The man who'd sat beside Declan's hospital bed after the ambush and said, "You did everything you could. Sometimes everything isn't enough, but that doesn't make it your fault." Declan had stopped believing that about 3 hours after Reeves left. The phone rang 4 times. Declan almost hung up, almost convinced himself this was stupid, that he should handle this alone, that he didn't deserve to ask for help from people he'd let down. Then Reeves answered, "Thorne." The commander's voice was exactly as Declan remembered. Gravel and authority with an undercurrent of genuine concern. "Is that you?" "Yeah," Declan rasped. "It's me. It's almost midnight. You okay, son?" The casual endearment made Declan's chest hurt in ways he couldn't name. "I need you to run an ID," Declan said. "Military Working Dog, MWD-8471. Name is Shadow." Silence on the other end. Then carefully, "Why would you need that information, Declan?" "Because he's in my cabin right now bleeding. Someone shot him and he ran." Declan's voice cracked. "He ran through a blizzard and collapsed on my porch. And I don't know what the hell is going on, but his tag says he's a military working dog and someone tried to kill him." "Jesus." More silence. Declan heard Reeves moving, heard the sound of a keyboard. "Stay on the line. Give me 5 minutes. Don't hang up." Declan waited, one hand resting on Shadow's side, feeling the shallow rise and fall of damaged breathing. He counted heartbeats, monitored respiratory rate, watched for signs of deterioration. But even as he waited, Declan noticed something that made his skin crawl. Shadow kept turning his head south, kept staring at the cabin's south-facing wall like he could see through the timber and the darkness to something miles away. And every time he looked in that direction, a low growl rumbled in his chest. Not aggressive, warning, like a sentinel alerting to danger that only he could sense. "Declan," Reeves said finally, and something in his voice made Declan's spine straighten with the old automatic response to command authority. "You absolutely sure about that ID number?" "I'm reading it off his tag right now." "Why?" "Because according to every military database I can access, MWD-8471, Shadow was declared killed in action 6 months ago." Declan's world tilted. "What? Killed in action? Afghanistan? Taliban ambush in Helmand province? There's a full casualty report. Recovery confirmation. He was even buried with military honors." "That's impossible." But even as Declan said it, he was looking at Shadow very much alive, very much bleeding on his cabin floor. "Thorne, I believe you," which means someone falsified casualty reports, faked a burial, and Declan, Reeves's voice dropped lower. "The operation where Shadow was supposedly killed. It's the same operation where Ghost died, the same ambush that took out your entire team." The room seemed to tilt. Declan put his free hand on the floor to steady himself. "That can't be a coincidence," Declan said. "No, it can't." Papers rustling on Reeves's end. "Declan, I'm looking at the after-action report right now. Your team and a K-9 unit were running parallel operations that day. When the ambush happened, both units were hit. You were extracted with survivors from your team. The K-9 unit..." Reeves stopped. "What about the K-9 unit?" "They weren't extracted. The report says they were KYA. All of them. Handler and dog bodies recovered later by follow-on forces." "But Shadow's alive," Declan said, "which means either the report is wrong or someone lied about recovering his body." Reeves was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had the weight of command decision behind it. "Declan, if Shadow survived that ambush and someone faked his death, we need to know why. And we need to know who." "How do I find out?" "You don't. You stay there. Keep the dog stable. I'm making calls. This goes higher than both of us." "Reeves." "That's an order, Thorne. You stumbled into something, and until we know what you need to stay off the grid, understood." Declan looked at Shadow, at the unwavering loyalty in that steady gaze, at a soldier who'd survived when everyone thought he was dead. "Understood." Declan lied. He hung up and sat in silence, one hand on Shadow's side, feeling each breath, each heartbeat. 6 months ago, Declan had lost everything. His team, his partner, his purpose. He'd come to this cabin to disappear, to wait for the nightmares and the guilt to finally finish what the Taliban couldn't. Now a ghost from that same operation was bleeding it on his floor, and Declan had a choice to make. He could follow orders. Stay put. Let other people handle this. Or he could be a SEAL again. Could investigate. Could fight. Could maybe, just maybe, save someone this time. Shadow's gaze met his. And in that look, Declan saw something he recognized. The same question he asked himself every morning when he woke up from nightmares. Are you going to give up, or are you going to keep fighting? Declan had been choosing to give up for 6 months. Maybe it was time to choose differently. But before he could move, before he could plan, Shadow did something that changed everything. The dog struggled to his feet despite his injuries, despite the bullet still lodged in his shoulder, despite the hypothermia and blood loss and exhaustion. He stumbled to the cabin's south-facing window and started growling. Not the warning rumble from before. This was different, urgent, desperate. Declan moved to the window and looked out into the blizzard. At first, he saw nothing but white, snow and darkness, and the kind of cold that killed. Then his eyes adjusted, picked out shapes in the distance. Lights. A mansion maybe 2 miles south, barely visible through the storm. A massive estate that Declan had noticed when he first moved to the area, but never investigated because he didn't care about his neighbors, didn't care about anything except being left alone. Shadow pressed against the glass, still growling, and Declan understood with sudden, terrible clarity. Shadow hadn't just run from something, he'd run to something. Or rather, he'd run away from something to find help. To find Declan specifically for reasons Declan couldn't yet understand. And whatever Shadow was warning about it was in that mansion. Declan's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. Is this Declan Thorne? A woman's voice. Young, terrified, familiar in a way that made Declan's stomach drop. Who is this? It's Natalie, your sister. Declan hadn't spoken to his younger sister in 8 months, not since he'd pushed away everyone who cared about him, burned every bridge to his old life. Hearing her voice now, hearing the panic in it, made his blood run cold. Natalie, what's wrong? It's Ilara, my daughter, she's missing. Natalie was crying, words tumbling out in a rush. We're at the Ashford estate. There was a dinner party. Ilara was playing and now we can't find her. The police are here, but it's been 3 hours in the storm. The Ashford estate. Declan looked at the mansion lights through the blizzard. The big house 2 miles south of me. Yes, Declan, please. I know we haven't talked. I know you wanted to be left alone. But Ilara is 10 years old and she's out there somewhere in this storm and I don't know what to do. Shadow's growling intensified. The dog was staring at those distant lights like he could see through walls and darkness to something terrible happening inside. And Declan realized Shadow hadn't just run to find any help. He'd run specifically to find Declan. Because whatever was happening in that mansion, Shadow knew Declan was the only person who could stop it. I'm coming, Declan said. Stay on the line. I'm 2 miles away. I'll be there in Mr. Thorne. A different voice on the phone now, older, female, cultured and calm in a way that set off every alarm bell in Declan's mind. This is Cordelia Ashford. I'm afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Your niece simply wandered off during the party. We're searching the grounds, but with this storm, put my sister back on. Of course, but Mr. Thorne, I wanted to assure you that we're doing everything we can. The police are here. We've organized search parties. There's no need for you to come out in this weather. It's dangerous. Something in the woman's voice, something smooth and practiced and utterly false, made the old fear recede for the first time in 6 months. Made the broken veteran step back and the operator step forward. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Declan said. He hung up, grabbed his coat, checked the sidearm he kept in his gun safe. Shadow was already at the door waiting, ignoring his injuries because the mission mattered more than pain. All right, Declan said to the dog, let's go get her. And they went out into the blizzard together, man and dog, soldier and soldier, both broken, both refusing to quit, both running towards something instead of away from it for the first time in 6 months. The walk to the Ashford estate should have taken 40 minutes in good weather. Declan made it in 12, following Shadow through the storm like the dog knew exactly where he was going. The mansion loomed ahead, a palatial structure of stone and glass worth at least $18 million was lit up like a beacon against the darkness. Police cars crowded the circular driveway. Officers moved through the grounds with flashlights. Search parties called out Ilara's name into the wind voices swallowed by the storm. Declan approached the front entrance, Shadow at his side. A police officer tried to stop him. Sir, this is a private property. Unless I'm family. Declan Thorne, Ilara's uncle. The officer checked a list, nodded, stepped aside. Declan and Shadow entered the mansion. Inside was warmth and light and the kind of wealth that felt obscene when a child was missing in a blizzard. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, art on the walls worth more than Declan had made in his entire military career. Natalie rushed to him, threw her arms around him. She looked older than 35, her face drawn with fear, tears streaming down her cheeks. Thank God you're here, thank God. Tell me what happened. Everything. We came for dinner. Cordelia invited us. She's been so kind since Harrison died. Natalie's voice broke on her late husband's name. Ilara was playing upstairs. She knows the house. She's been here dozens of times. But when I went to check on her, she was gone. We've searched everywhere. Declan, what if she went outside? What if she's not outside? The certainty in Declan's voice surprised even him. He looked at Shadow. The dog was staring at a door beneath the grand staircase, a door that led down. "She's in the house." A woman appeared at the top of the staircase. Early 50s, elegant in a way that money could buy but couldn't quite make authentic. Chanel suit, perfect hair, jewelry that probably cost more than a small car. But it was her eyes that caught Declan's attention. Cold, calculating, empty of anything resembling real concern. "Mr. Thorne," she said, descending the stairs with practiced great images. "I'm Cordelia Ashford. I'm so sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Shadow's growl was immediate and visceral. The dog's hackles rose, teeth bared, every line of his body screaming threat, warning, danger. Cordelia stopped on the stairs, her perfect composure cracking for just a fraction of a second. "That's quite a dog you have there." "He doesn't like you," Declan said. "Yes, well, I'm sure he's just stressed by all the commotion." Cordelia continued down the stairs, but she gave Shadow a wide berth. "Mr. Thorne, I assure you we're doing everything possible to find your niece. The police have been thorough. We've searched every room, every closet, every—" "You haven't searched the basement." Cordelia's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. "The basement is locked. It's climate-controlled storage for wine and art. No one goes down there without—" Shadow bolted. Despite his injuries, despite the bullet in his shoulder, the dog launched himself at the basement door, scratching, whining, barking, with desperate urgency. "That dog needs to be controlled," Cordelia said, all pretense of warmth gone from her voice. "Officer, please, remove." Declan was already moving. He pushed past Cordelia, past the police officer trying to intervene, reached the basement door. It was locked, but the lock was flimsy, designed for privacy, not security. One hard kick and the frame splintered. "Mr. Thorne, you can't just—" Declan ignored her. He and Shadow plunged down the stairs into darkness. Declan's hand found a light switch. Fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, revealing a basement that was exactly as Cordelia described: climate-controlled storage, wine racks, crated art, expensive furniture covered in sheets. But Shadow wasn't interested in any of that. The dog ran to the far corner, to something that made Declan's blood freeze. A commercial refrigerator, industrial size. The kind used for bulk food storage in restaurants or catering. The door was closed, and there was a chair wedged under the handle. Years of training took over. Declan yanked the chair away, pulled open the refrigerator door. Cold air poured out, cold that had nothing to do with normal refrigeration. This was freezer-level cold, maybe 30 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe lower. And curled up in the corner, shivering so hard her whole body shook, was a little girl. Alara, 10 years old, blue lips, skin pale as snow, eyes closed, hypothermia written in every line of her small, fragile body. "No," Declan breathed. But even as horror tried to paralyze him, years of battlefield medicine kicked in automatically, already lifting Alara out of the freezer, already checking for a pulse. Faint, thready, but there. She was alive. Barely. "Natalie!" Declan's shout echoed through the basement. "Call an ambulance, now!" He carried Alara up the stairs, Shadow right beside him. Natalie's scream when she saw her daughter was a sound Declan would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Police officers swarmed, radios crackling, someone calling for paramedics, someone else asking questions Declan couldn't process. He laid Alara on a couch, started warming her, carefully using blankets and body heat, because warming too fast could cause cardiac arrest. "Stay with me, Alara," Declan whispered. "Come on, kiddo, stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open. Amber, the same shade as Shadow's. She looked at Declan with recognition that shouldn't have been possible, because he'd never met his niece in person, had stayed away from all family gatherings for 6 months. But she knew him anyway. "Uncle Declan," she whispered, her voice so faint he could barely hear it. "Aunt Cordelia, she locked me in there. 6 hours. She said I'd die like Daddy." The world stopped. Declan looked up. Cordelia stood across the room, surrounded by police officers, her face the picture of shock and concern. "I don't know what the child means," Cordelia said. "She must be delirious from the cold." "I would never," Shadow's growl cut through her words. The dog positioned himself between Cordelia and Alara, every line of his body screaming protection. And Declan understood. Shadow had been running from Cordelia, had been shot trying to escape her, had tracked Declan through a blizzard, because somehow, someway, the dog knew Declan was the only person who could save Alara. "Officer," Declan said quietly, "I want that refrigerator examined. I want to know how long it's been locked. I want to know if a child could have gotten in there by accident." The lead detective, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, looked at Cordelia, then at Alara, then at the basement stairs. We'll investigate thoroughly, Mr. Thorne. Paramedics arrived. They loaded Alara onto a stretcher, started treating the hypothermia, said words like critical and touch and go that made Natalie sob into Declan's shoulder. As they wheeled Alara out, she reached for Declan's hand. "Don't let Aunt Cordelia take me," she whispered. "Please, she wants me dead. Like Daddy. Like the others." The others. Those two words changed everything. Turned a child's near death into something darker. Turned an accident into attempted murder. Turned Cordelia Ashford from concerned stepmother into something Declan's instincts screamed was far, far worse. "I won't let anyone hurt you," Declan promised. "You're safe now." But as the ambulance pulled away, as police officers started questioning Cordelia, as Shadow pressed against Declan's leg, with that same unwavering trust Ghost used to show, Declan knew this was just the beginning. Shadow hadn't just survived the same ambush that killed Ghost. He'd survived something else. Something connected to Cordelia Ashford and her mansion and the little girl who'd almost frozen to death. And Declan was going to find out what. 6 months ago, he'd stopped being a SEAL, stopped caring, stopped fighting. But tonight, with a wounded dog depending on him and a niece who'd almost died, Declan Thorne remembered something important. You can take the operator out of the fight, but you can never take the fight out of the operator. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Declan sat in a plastic chair that was too small for his frame. Shadow curled at his feet despite the no animals policy that 3 different nurses had tried to enforce before the trauma surgeon backed Declan up with 6 words, "The dog stays" or "I walk." Alara had been in treatment for 4 hours. Hypothermia, stage 3. Core body temperature, 87 degrees when the paramedics got her stabilized. The doctors said she was lucky. Set another hour in that freezer, and they'd be having a very different conversation. Natalie paced the hallway, her phone pressed to her ear, talking to lawyers, to Child Protective Services, to anyone who would listen to a mother's terror, wrapped in rage. Declan hadn't moved in those 4 hours. Hadn't eaten. Hadn't slept. Had just sat there with his hand on Shadow's head, feeling the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing, anchoring himself to something real, while his mind ran tactical scenarios he couldn't quite name yet. Cordelia Ashford had left the mansion in a limousine flanked by lawyers, untouched by police questioning, because her story was airtight. The refrigerator door had no external lock. A child could have climbed in playing hide and seek. The chair under the handle could have fallen there by accident. Alara's accusation was the trauma-induced delusion of a hypothermic 10-year-old. No evidence, no charges, no justice. The lead detective, a woman named Sarah Morrison, who looked like she'd seen too much and believed too little, had pulled Declan aside before leaving the hospital. "I believe your niece," she'd said quietly. "But belief isn't evidence, Mrs. Ashford has 3 lawyers and connections that go all the way to the governor's office. Unless you can give me something concrete, my hands are tied." Now sitting in the waiting room while his niece fought to survive something that should never have happened, Declan made a decision. If the system couldn't touch Cordelia Ashford, he'd work outside the system. Like a SEAL. His phone buzzed. "Commander Reeves." "Tell me you didn't do something stupid," Reeves said without preamble. "Define stupid." "Thorne, I just got a call from someone very high up asking why a retired SEAL is making inquiries into classified K-9 operations, and why that same SEAL just pulled a child out of a freezer at one of the wealthiest estates in Colorado." Those things connected. Silence. "Then I don't know." "Are they?" Declan looked at Shadow. The dog was staring at the hospital's south-facing windows, toward the direction of the Ashford estate, that same warning growl rumbling low in his chest. "Yeah," Declan said, "I think they are." "Then listen carefully. I ran that background check on Cordelia Ashford like you asked. Declan, this woman has been married 3 times. All 3 husbands died under questionable circumstances." Declan's blood went cold. "How questionable?" "Roland Ashford, husband number 1. Fell down the stairs in their Boston townhouse 18 years ago. Broke his neck. She inherited $180 million. Duncan Whitmore, husband number 2. Drowned in their pool in Miami 12 years ago. She inherited $220 million. Harrison Whitmore, husband number 3, your brother-in-law, died in a car accident 8 months ago right here in Colorado. She inherited $520 million. Jesus Christ. It gets worse. Harrison had a daughter from his first marriage. Your niece, Alara, she's the sole heir to his estate. But if something happens to her before she turns 18, guardianship and inheritance default to the surviving spouse. Cordelia, 520 million reasons to make a little girl disappear. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The freezer wasn't an accident. It was attempted murder, premeditated, calculated, and it wasn't Cordelia's first time. How did she get away with it? Declan asked. 3 dead husbands. Nobody investigated. They investigated every time, and every time she had alibis, witnesses, lawyers who made the questions go away. Thorne, this woman has resources you can't imagine. Judges in her pocket, police chiefs on her payroll. She's been getting away with murder for nearly 2 decades. Not anymore. Declan, don't. You can't fight her head on. She'll destroy you. Then I won't fight her head on. I'll fight her like I fought in Helmand Province. Quietly, carefully, until it's too late for her to stop me. He hung up before Reeves could argue. The trauma surgeon appeared still in scrubs exhaustion, written in every line of her face. Ilara's stable, she said. We've got her core temperature back to 94 degrees. She's going to make it. Natalie's sob of relief echoed through the waiting room. Can I see her? Declan asked. Family only. I'm her uncle. The surgeon looked at Shadow, then at Declan, and something in her eyes said she understood more than her words let on. 5 minutes, and the dog stays outside the ICU. Ilara looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines and warming blankets. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady, her face still pale but no longer blue. Declan pulled a chair close, sat down, took her small hand in his. Hey, kiddo, he said softly. You're going to be okay. Her eyes opened, clear and steady despite everything she'd endured. She tried to kill me, Ilara whispered. Like she killed Daddy. I know. Nobody believes me. I believe you. Tears slid down Ilara's cheeks. Daddy knew. Before he died. He told me if anything happened to him, I should find you. He said you were the only person who could stop her. Declan's throat tightened. He'd never met Harrison Whitmore. Had cut himself off from family so completely after the ambush that he'd missed his own brother-in-law's funeral. Why me? Declan asked. Because you're a SEAL. Because you don't quit. Because Daddy said when bad people think they're untouchable, they need someone who fights dirty. Ilara's grip on his hand tightened. Uncle Declan, she's going to try again. She told me in the freezer. She said I'd die just like Daddy, that nobody would ever know, that she always wins. Not this time, Declan promised. This time she loses. He left Ilara with Natalie and walked back to the waiting room where Shadow was pacing, agitated, pulling against the leash the nurse had insisted on. What's wrong, boy? Shadow pulled harder toward the elevator, toward the parking garage, every line of his body screaming urgency, danger, threat. Declan followed. They reached the parking garage level 3. The automatic doors opened. Shadow bolted, dragging Declan toward a black Mercedes S-Class parked in a handicapped spot. Cordelia Ashford sat in the driver's seat, window down, watching the hospital entrance like a predator watching prey. She saw Declan and smiled. Cold. Perfect. Empty. Mr. Thorne, how is dear Ilara? Declan approached the car slowly. Shadow's growl a constant warning. Alive. No thanks to you. I'm so relieved. It must have been terrifying for her getting trapped in that refrigerator during a game of hide and seek. Children can be so reckless. She didn't get trapped. You locked her in there. Cordelia's smile didn't waver. Do you have proof of that accusation, Mr. Thorne? Because my lawyers would be very interested in a slander lawsuit. Why are you here? I wanted to make sure my stepdaughter was receiving the best care. I've already arranged for her transfer to a private facility with specialists in pediatric trauma. She's not going anywhere with you. Actually, as her legal guardian, I have every right to make medical decisions on her behalf. Her mother is emotionally unstable, clearly unfit. I've already filed an emergency petition for full custody. The hearing is Monday at 9 a.m. 72 hours from now, Ilara will be under my care. The casual way she said it, the absolute certainty in her voice made Declan's hands clench into fists. Over my dead body. Cordelia's smile widened. That can be arranged. She reached into her purse, pulled out a manila envelope, tossed it onto the passenger seat. You should read that before you make threats you can't back up, Mr. Thorne. It's quite illuminating. She drove away before Declan could respond. He picked up the envelope. Inside were photographs, surveillance photos, of him, leaving the VA hospital, picking up prescriptions, sitting alone in his cabin, staring at nothing, and medical records, his medical records, PTSD diagnosis, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Every private detail of his mental health laid bare. There was a note typed on expensive cardstock. I know everything about you, Declan Thorne. Chief Petty Officer, SEAL Team 7, Operation Red Wing, 6 months ago. 8 men lost. Your fault according to the after-action review. Ghost died because you hesitated. You've been waiting to DK ever since. One phone call, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're mentally unfit to protect anyone, least of all a traumatized child. Back off or I'll destroy what's left of your pathetic life. Declan stood in the parking garage, the old fear trying to crawl back up his spine. But Shadow pressed against his leg. Warm, solid, real. And Declan remembered he wasn't that broken man in the cabin anymore. He had a mission now. Someone who needed him. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number he'd found in Harrison Whitmore's office records during a quick search online. Dr. Frost, this is Declan Thorne. I need your help. Dr. Lillian Frost met him at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital at 11 p.m. She was late 40s, gray hair pulled back, eyes that had seen too many lies disguised as natural deaths. Harrison called me 2 weeks before he died, she said, stirring coffee she hadn't touched. Said he thought Cordelia was poisoning him. He felt sick every time he ate meals she prepared. Dizzy, weak, heart palpitations. Did you test him? I ran a full toxicology panel. It came back negative, but I suspected aconite poisoning. It's a plant-based toxin that mimics heart attack symptoms. The problem is it's nearly undetectable after 72 hours. By the time Harrison came to me, it was too late to find traces. But you suspected anyway. I refused to sign his death certificate, said I wanted an autopsy. Cordelia's lawyers threatened to sue me for malpractice. The medical board launched an investigation into my practice. I backed it down. Dr. Frost's hands shook as she finally took a sip of coffee. And Harrison died 3 days later in a car accident that was ruled mechanical failure. Except it wasn't mechanical failure. The brakes were sabotaged, I'm certain of it. But by the time I could convince anyone to investigate, the car had been crushed and recycled. Do you have any evidence? Anything I can use? Dr. Frost reached into her bag, pulled out 3 vials of blood. I kept samples, from Harrison and from his 2 previous husbands, whose bodies I happened to examine during my residency in Boston and Miami. I've held on to them for 12 years, waiting for someone to care enough to test them properly. Declan looked at the vials, dark red, preserved, illegal to possess probably, but proof. Can you test for aconite now? I sent them to a private lab yesterday. Results should be back in 48 hours. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Even if the tests come back positive, Cordelia will claim the samples were contaminated. Her lawyers will shred any evidence I provide. You need more than blood work, Mr. Thorne. You need a confession. Declan drove back to the hospital, Shadow in the passenger seat, both of them silent. The dog hadn't stopped staring at the manila envelope on the dashboard, the one with Declan's medical records, the one Cordelia had used to threaten him. She knows too much, Declan said aloud. About me, about the ambush, about Ghost. Shadow's ears perked up at Ghost's name. How does she know, boy? How does someone like Cordelia Ashford know classified details about a SEAL operation in Afghanistan? Shadow turned his head south, toward the Ashford estate, and started growling again. Declan made a decision. He called Reeves. I need classified intel on Shadow. Everything. His handler, his unit, his missions. Thorne, that's above my clearance level. Then find someone whose clearance level it isn't. Shadow came to me for a reason. I need to know why. Give me 6 hours. Declan spent those 6 hours in Alara's hospital room, watching her sleep, making sure Cordelia didn't try anything. Natalie dozed in a chair, exhausted beyond words. At 5 a.m., Reeves called back. Shadow's handler was a Sergeant Kyle Brennan, Marine Corps, K-9 specialist. He and Shadow did 3 tours in Afghanistan together. Their specialty was detection. Explosives. Not exactly. Shadow was trained in a very specific skill set. Chemical detection, specifically toxins used in smuggling operations. Opiates, synthetic drugs, and Reeves paused. Poisons. Declan's blood ran cold. Poisons. Well, Shadow can detect over 40 different toxic compounds by scent, including aconite. He was part of a classified program investigating drug smuggling rings that use poisoning to eliminate competition and witnesses. Where's Kyle Brennan now? Killed in action 6 months ago, same operation that killed Ghost. But here's the thing, Thorne. Brennan wasn't supposed to be in Helmand Province that day. His unit was reassigned at the last minute based on intelligence about a high-value target. Intelligence that turned out to be false. Someone set them up. That's what I'm thinking. And whoever did it wanted both Brennan and Shadow dead. They succeeded with Brennan, but Shadow escaped. And came to me. Not randomly, I found something else. A note in Brennan's personal effects. It was addressed to you. To me, I never met Kyle Brennan. I'm reading it now. Quote, if I don't make it back, Shadow will find Declan Thorne. I trained him to track Thorne's scent using gear samples from the Joint Task Force database. Thorne is the only operator I trust to finish what I started. He'll understand when Shadow shows him. Trust the dog. Trust Thorne, Kyle Brennan. End quote. Declan sat in silence, processing. Kyle Brennan had trained Shadow to find him specifically, had known he might die, had prepared for it by giving Shadow a final mission: find Declan Thorne. What was Brennan investigating? Declan asked. That's classified above my level. But reading between the lines of his service record, I'd say he was tracking a smuggling operation that involved high-level corruption, people with money and power who use poison to eliminate threats. People like Cordelia Ashford. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. At 7 a.m., a man in an expensive suit entered the hospital waiting room and approached Declan. Mr. Thorne, my name is Bennett Cross. I'm Cordelia Ashford's attorney. Shadow's growl was immediate. You're not welcome here, Declan said. I'm not here on Mrs. Ashford's behalf. Bennett looked around nervously, lowered his voice. I'm here because I can't work for her anymore. I can't be part of what she's doing. What is she doing? She's planning to take full custody of Alara on Monday. And once she has custody, she's going to finish what she started. Another accident, another tragedy, another inheritance. Why are you telling me this? Because Harrison Whitmore was my friend. He came to me 3 weeks before he died and gave me something. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to someone who could stop Cordelia. Someone she couldn't buy or intimidate. Bennett pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. A wedding ring. Men's. Platinum with a single diamond. Harrison had this custom made. It looks like a normal ring, but there's a microchip embedded in the band. Technology he got from a defense contractor friend. It's a recording device. Declan unwrapped the ring carefully. What's on it? 53 audio files. Conversations Harrison recorded over the 3 months before his death. Cordelia planning his murder. Confessing to poisoning him. Admitting she killed her first 2 husbands the same way. Talking about how she'd kill Alara once Harrison was gone. Why didn't you go to the police? I did. They said the recordings were inadmissible. Illegal surveillance, attorney-client privilege, complications. And Cordelia has enough judges in her pocket that any prosecution would die before it started. Bennett handed Declan the ring. But you're not the police. You're a SEAL, and Harrison believed you were the only person who could get justice for his daughter. He didn't know me. He knew your service record. Knew you were the highest decorated operator in your team. Knew you ran missions that officially never happened. He told me, quote, if I die, find Declan Thorne. He fights dirty, he fights alone, and he doesn't quit. Declan looked at the ring, at 53 chances to prove what Cordelia had done. I need a way to access these files without tipping off Cordelia that I have them. The chip needs a specific reader. Military-grade encryption. Harrison kept the reader in his office safe. Where? The Ashford estate, 2nd floor. His private study that Cordelia sealed off after his death. She'll never let me in there. Bennett pulled out a keycard. I still have access. I can get you in tonight when she's at a fundraiser, but you'll have 15 minutes, maybe 20. Security patrols every half hour. That's enough. At 9 p.m., Declan and Shadow stood outside the Ashford estate. The mansion was lit but mostly empty. Cordelia at a charity gala downtown, according to Bennett's intel. Bennett met them at the service entrance, hands shaking. This is insane. If she finds out I helped you. She won't. Where's Harrison's office? They moved through servant corridors, avoiding the main rooms where staff still worked. Up a back staircase to the 2nd floor. Down a hallway lined with art worth more than most people made in a lifetime. Harrison's study was locked with a biometric scanner, but Bennett's keycard overrode it. Inside was everything a rich man's office should be. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a wall safe hidden behind a painting of the Colorado mountains. Combination, Declan asked. Ilara's birthday, 0417. The safe opened. Inside were documents cached in a small electronic device that looked like a sophisticated card reader. Declan inserted the wedding ring. The device hummed to life, screen displaying 53 files detected. Download Y/N. He pulled out a flash drive, started the transfer. Shadow suddenly tensed, ears flat, growl building. What's wrong? Bennett asked. Declan heard it then. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving fast. She knows we're here, Declan said. That's impossible. She's at the gala. I checked. The study door burst open. 3 men in tactical gear. Not police, not security. Private contractors with the kind of hardware that costs serious money. Mr. Thorne, the lead contractor, said, Mrs. Ashford would like you to step away from her late husband's property. Declan glanced at the download bar, 73%. Tell Mrs. Ashford I'm just leaving. You're not going anywhere until we recover that flash drive. 81%. Shadow positioned himself between Declan and the contractor's teeth, bared ready. That dog moves, we put it down, the contractor said, hand on his sidearm. Years of training kicked in. 3 hostiles, enclosed space, armed, but overconfident. They expected him to surrender because he was outnumbered. They didn't know he'd cleared rooms against worse odds in Fallujah, 94%. Last warning, Thorne, 100%. Download complete. Declan grabbed the flash drive, pocketed it, looked at the contractors. Your boss made a mistake, he said quietly. She threatened a child, and she thought I'd walk away. You don't have a choice. I'm a SEAL. I always have a choice. He hit the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Shadow attacked before the contractors could draw weapons, 85 pounds of trained military working dog, hitting the lead contractor with enough force to send him stumbling backward. Declan moved. Close quarters combat against armed opponents in tight spaces. First contractor went down from an elbow to the solar plexus. Second contractor got his weapon up. Declan redirected the barrel, drove a knee into the man's thigh, used his momentum to slam him into the bookshelf. Third contractor actually got a shot off. The round went wide, punching through drywall, the noise deafening in the enclosed space. Shadow had the man's gun arm in his jaws before he could fire again. 30 seconds later, 3 contractors were on the floor, disarmed, incapacitated, but alive. Declan grabbed Bennett. We're leaving, now. They ran, down the hallway, down the servants' stairs, through the service entrance. Behind them, alarms started wailing, more security responding. Bennett's car was parked 2 blocks away. They made it with seconds to spare, tires squealing as they pulled away from the estate. Oh my God, Bennett kept repeating. Oh my God, she's going to kill me. She's going to prison, Declan said. These recordings are enough to prosecute her. Not if we can't stay alive long enough to use them. Declan's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Cordelia's voice. Cold, calm, deadly. Mr. Thorne, I hope you enjoyed your little burglary. It won't do you any good. 53 recordings say otherwise. Those recordings are inadmissible in court. And even if they weren't, I have judges who will ensure they never see a jury. You've accomplished nothing except signing your own death warrant. We'll see. You will, very soon. I don't make threats, Mr. Thorne. I make promises. And I promise you this, you and anyone who helps you will not live to testify against me. You should have stayed in your cabin, should have kept drinking yourself to death alone. Now you'll just die faster. She hung up. Declan looked at Shadow in the rearview mirror. The dog was bleeding from a cut on his shoulder where one of the contractors had landed a blow, but his gaze was steady, focused, unafraid. Bennett, where can we go that Cordelia can't find us? Nowhere. She has resources everywhere. Cops, judges, private investigators. The moment you surface, she'll know. Then we don't surface. We go dark, like a combat op. Declan knew a safe house, an old SEAL buddy's cabin 40 miles north, off-grid, isolated. He called in the favor, explained enough to get a yes without revealing too much. They arrived at 2:30 a.m. The cabin was small, secure, defensible. Declan finally had time to examine the flash drive. 53 audio files, all dated, all time-stamped. He listened to the first one. Harrison's voice. Cordelia, why did you make chamomile tea? I'm not sick. Cordelia's voice. It'll help you sleep, darling. You've been so stressed. Harrison, it tastes bitter. Cordelia, that's the honey, organic. Very expensive. Then nothing for 3 minutes. Then Harrison again, slurring, I feel dizzy. Cordelia, what did you... Cordelia laughing. Aconite, my love, just a little bit. Not enough to kill you today, but enough that over 3 months your heart will give out. They'll call it natural causes, stress, genetics, and I'll inherit everything. The recording ended. The old tremor threatened to return to Declan's hands. But this time it wasn't fear, it was rage. He listened to more files. Cordelia admitting she'd killed Roland Ashford by pushing him down the stairs. Duncan Whitmore by drugging him and drowning him in the pool. Planning Harrison's brake failure. Discussing how she'd handle Alara's death. Make it look like an accident. Children are fragile, a fall, a drowning, maybe hypothermia if I'm feeling creative. Evidence, concrete, damning. But Bennett was right, inadmissible in court. illegal recording. And even if a judge allowed it, Cordelia's lawyers would shred the chain of custody. Declan needed more. At 4 a.m., his phone rang. Reeves, Thorne, where the hell are you? I just got a call from Colorado PD saying you assaulted 3 security contractors at the Ashford estate. Self-defense. They're filing attempted murder charges. Cordelia Ashford has a warrant out for your arrest. Of course she does. Declan, you need to turn yourself in. Let me get you a lawyer. If you run, you look guilty. I have evidence she tried to kill my niece. Evidence you obtained through breaking and entering. It won't hold up. Then I'll find evidence that will. He hung up. Shadow was pacing again, agitated, staring out the window toward the south. What is it, boy? Then Declan heard it. Vehicles, multiple, coming up the access road fast. He looked out the window. 3 SUVs, black. Expensive, not police. Cordelia had found them. Bennett, get down. Declan grabbed his sidearm, checked the magazine. 15 rounds, not enough against however many contractors Cordelia had sent. Shadow positioned himself at the door ready. The SUVs stopped 50 yards from the cabin. Doors opened. 6 men got out, all armed, all moving with military precision. This wasn't security. This was a hit squad. Declan's phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. Come out unarmed. We only want the flash drive. Give it to us and walk away alive. Declan texted back, come get it. 3 seconds later, the cabin's front window shattered. Flashbang grenade. Declan grabbed Shadow and Bennett, pulled them into the bathroom, slammed the door. The flashbang detonated. Blinding light. Deafening noise. Smoke filling the cabin. Declan heard footsteps. The hit squad was coming in. He had maybe 30 seconds before they breached the bathroom. Shadow, quiet, he whispered. The dog obeyed instantly, every muscle coiled but silent. Declan positioned himself behind the door. Classic ambush point. Close quarters. Surprise advantage. The bathroom door kicked open. First man through got a pistol barrel to the temple. Down. Second man saw Declan tried to bring his weapon around. Shadow attacked, clamping onto the man's arm. The weapon fell. Declan disarmed him with 2 strikes. Third man was smarter, stayed in the doorway, weapon up, center mass on Declan. Don't move or I shoot. Declan didn't move, but Shadow did. The dog released the second contractor and launched himself at the third before the man could react. They went down hard. The weapon discharged into the ceiling. Declan was on the man in a second, disarming him, neutralizing the threat. 3 down. Police! Someone shouted from the main room. Drop your weapons. Declan froze. Real cops this time, not contractors. He stepped out of the bathroom, hands up. 2 officers, guns drawn. Behind them, Cordelia's 3 contractors getting to their feet. Declan Thorne, you're under arrest for assault, breaking and entering, and attempted murder. Those men attacked me. They work for Cordelia Ashford. She tried to kill my niece. We'll sort it out at the station, on the ground, now. Declan knew how this would play. Cordelia's lawyers would have him charged, held without bail, isolated, while she finished what she started with Alara. He looked at Shadow. The dog was bleeding again. Old injury reopened, but his gaze was unwavering. Trust the dog, Kyle Brennan had written. Declan made a decision. Run, he said. Shadow bolted, through the broken window, into the darkness. Stop that dog, one officer shouted. Let him go, the other said. We've got Thorne. That's what matters. They cuffed Declan, read him his rights, loaded him into a patrol car. As they drove away, Declan saw Shadow disappearing into the trees, the flash drive still in the dog's tactical vest pocket where Declan had hidden it. Cordelia thought she'd won. She was wrong. Because Shadow wasn't just running away. He was running towards something. Toward the hospital where Alara was still recovering. Toward the one person who needed the evidence most. Toward justice. The county jail holding cell smelled like sweat and despair and broken promises. Declan sat on a concrete bench, bolted to the wall, hands cuffed behind his back, despite the fact that 3 different officers had verified he wasn't actually a threat to anyone except Cordelia Ashford's contractors. 48 hours. That's how long they could hold him before formal charges had to be filed. 48 hours during which Cordelia could make Alara disappear, could destroy evidence, could buy enough judges and prosecutors to make any case against her evaporate like morning fog. But this time Declan had something Cordelia didn't know about. Shadow, running through the darkness with 53 pieces of evidence, heading straight for the one person who could use them. The cell door opened. A woman in her 50s entered, FBI credentials hanging around her neck, eyes that had seen too many guilty people walk free. Mr. Thorne, I'm Special Agent Catherine Wells. We need to talk. About what? About why a decorated Navy SEAL is breaking into mansions and assaulting security personnel. I didn't assault anyone. I defended myself against contractors hired to kill me. Wells pulled out a chair, sat down, studied Declan with the kind of professional assessment that came from 20 years of interviewing suspects. The contractors tell a different story. Say you attacked them without provocation, that you stole property belonging to Cordelia Ashford, that you made threats against her life. They're lying. Probably, but I need proof, not probability. Wells leaned forward. Here's what I know. 3 wealthy men married to the same woman all died under suspicious circumstances. A 10-year-old girl nearly froze to death in a locked refrigerator. And a military working dog that was declared KYA 6 months ago somehow ended up leading you to that same little girl. You've been investigating Cordelia. For 8 months, since Harrison Whitmore's car accident, that wasn't an accident. I've got circumstantial evidence. I've got pattern recognition. I've got 3 exhumed bodies showing traces of aconite that her lawyers claim is environmental contamination. But what I don't have is anything that will survive her legal team. I can give you what you need. The flash drive your dog is carrying. Declan's surprise must have shown because Wells almost smiled. I've been tracking that dog since he escaped the ambush in Afghanistan. Kyle Brennan was working with us before he died. Said he'd train Shadow to find you if anything went wrong. Said you were the only operator he trusted to finish the investigation. Wells pulled out a tablet, showed Declan a surveillance photo. Shadow entering the hospital where Alara was being treated. Your dog went straight to your niece, hasn't left her room since. And the nurses say there's a flash drive in his vest pocket that he won't let anyone touch. The flash drive has 53 audio recordings. Cordelia confessing to 3 murders, planning a 4th. It's inadmissible in court, but it gives me probable cause to get a warrant, to seize her financial records, to interview witnesses she's paid off, to build a case that will stick. Wells stood up. I can have you released in 1 hour if you cooperate fully. Give me everything you have, everything Kyle Brennan told that dog to tell you. Kyle never told me anything. He died before we could meet. Then let me tell you what he found. 6 months before he died, Brennan was investigating a smuggling ring that used aconite poisoning to eliminate competition. The ring had connections to wealthy Americans who used the poison for inheritance schemes. He traced the supply chain back to 3 murders in the United States. All wealthy men, all married to the same woman. Cordelia Ashford. He was building a case when he got reassigned to Helmand Province on intel that turned out to be fabricated. Someone wanted him dead before he could testify. They succeeded with Brennan, but Shadow survived, and Shadow knows everything Brennan knew. Declan looked at Wells with new understanding. How does a mob know case files? Shadow was trained in scent detection for toxins, but Brennan also trained him in evidence recovery. That dog can identify documents, recordings, physical evidence related to poisoning cases. And according to Brennan's notes, Shadow knows where Cordelia keeps her poison supply, where she hides documents related to her murders, where she's vulnerable. You want me to use Shadow to gather evidence. I want you to help me put a serial killer in prison before she kills again. Wells made a phone call. 30 minutes later, Declan walked out of the county jail, all charges dropped pending further investigation. The official story was that the contractors had attacked first, that Declan had acted in self-defense, that Cordelia Ashford was now under federal investigation for multiple homicides. The unofficial story was that Wells had leverage over the local prosecutor and wasn't afraid to use it. Declan went straight to the hospital. Alara was awake, sitting up in bed, Shadow curled at her feet like he'd been there since birth. The dog's tail started wagging the moment Declan entered the room. Uncle Declan? Alara's voice was stronger now, color returning to her cheeks. Shadow wouldn't let anyone near me. The nurses tried to make him leave, but he just growled and they gave up. Good boy. Declan scratched behind Shadow's ears, felt the dog press into his hand. Did he bring you something? Alara held up the flash drive. He had this in his vest. I took it out to see what it was, and he licked my hand like he was saying, keep it safe. Declan took the flash drive, turned it over in his hands. 53 pieces of evidence. 53 nails in Cordelia's coffin. Agent Wells moved fast. Within 72 hours, she had warrants for Cordelia's financial records, her properties, her medical files. FBI teams searched the Ashford estate from foundation to roof, finding exactly what Shadow had been trained to detect. A hidden safe in Cordelia's bedroom containing vials of aconite extract, enough to kill 20 people. Documentation of purchases from an overseas supplier. Handwritten notes detailing dosage amounts and timing for slow poisoning that mimicked natural death. But before the arrest could happen, Cordelia made one final play. The next morning, Declan received a call from Natalie. Her voice was raw with panic. Cordelia filed an emergency petition. She has a court order. She's taking Alara for medical treatment. Says the hospital found leukemia in her blood work. That's impossible. Alara was fine yesterday. The doctor who signed the order works for a clinic Cordelia owns. They're saying Alara needs immediate chemotherapy, that I'm an unfit mother for delaying treatment. Declan, they're taking her in 2 hours. Declan was at the hospital in 15 minutes. Cordelia stood in the hallway outside Alara's room, flanked by Bennett Cross, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and a doctor in an expensive suit who looked more like a businessman than a physician. Mr. Thorne, Cordelia's smile was razor thin. I'm glad you're here. Alara needs family support during this difficult diagnosis. Show me the test results. The doctor, his badge read. Dr. Gerald Stanton handed Declan a file. Complete blood count shows abnormal white cell proliferation consistent with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She needs treatment immediately. Declan scanned the results. The numbers looked legitimate, but something felt wrong. I want a second opinion. There's no time, Dr. Stanton said. Every hour we delay, then we'll get it done in the next hour. Dr. Lillian Frost arrived 20 minutes later. She drew blood, herself ran the sample through the hospital's independent lab, not the clinic Cordelia owned. The results came back 45 minutes later. Alara's blood work is completely normal, Dr. Frost said, her voice tight with controlled fury. No abnormal cells, no indication of leukemia whatsoever. Declan turned to Dr. Stanton. How do you explain that? Dr. Stanton's face went pale. The lab must have made an error. We'll need to investigate. You falsified the results. Declan's voice was quiet, deadly. Cordelia paid you to create a fake diagnosis so she could get emergency custody. Cordelia's mask cracked for just a moment, a flash of pure rage before the perfect composure returned. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Thorne. One my lawyers will be very interested in pursuing. But the judge who reviewed the case 30 minutes later revoked the emergency custody order. Alara would stay with her mother pending full investigation. As Cordelia left the hospital, Agent Wells was waiting with 6 federal marshals. Cordelia Ashford, you're under arrest for the murders of Roland Ashford, Duncan Whitmore, and Harrison Whitmore, and the attempted murder of Alara Whitmore. Wells arrested Cordelia at the hospital entrance in front of security cameras and 24 witnesses with professional efficiency that left no room for legal maneuvering. Cordelia's mask finally cracked. Not completely, but enough that the cameras caught the flash of rage in her eyes, the tightness around her mouth, the way her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. You'll regret this, Cordelia said quietly as they cuffed her. I have lawyers who will destroy you. Good, Wells replied. I look forward to facing them in court. The trial began 96 days later in Denver federal court. The prosecution team included Wells' 2 assistant U.S. attorneys and enough evidence to fill 3 storage rooms. The defense team included 7 lawyers from firms that charge 4 figures per hour, all coordinating a strategy designed to create reasonable doubt where none should exist. Declan sat in the gallery every day, shadow at his feet, Alara beside him, holding his hand. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 21 days of testimony and evidence and legal maneuvering that tested everyone's patience, except the jury, who listened with the kind of grim attention that came from understanding they held a life in their hands. Day 1 was opening statements. Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Foster stood before the jury with the presence of someone who'd sent worse people to prison and would sleep fine afterward. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about greed disguised as love. About a woman who married 3 wealthy men and murdered all of them for their money. About a woman who tried to murder a 10-year-old child to claim an inheritance of $520 million. Foster pointed at Cordelia, who sat at the defense table in a conservative gray suit, face arranged in an expression of wounded dignity. The evidence will show that Cordelia Ashford is a serial killer who used aconite poisoning to commit murder 3 times and attempted murder once. That she planned these crimes meticulously. That she showed no remorse, and that she would have killed again if not for the courage of a Navy SEAL and the loyalty of a military dog who refused to let evil win. The lead defense attorney, Marcus Whitfield of Whitfield and Associates, delivered his opening with the smooth confidence of a man who'd never lost a case he couldn't appeal. The prosecution wants you to believe my client is a monster, but the evidence will show something very different. That Cordelia Ashford is a grieving widow who loved her husbands deeply, that their deaths were tragic accidents compounded by unfortunate coincidence, that a disturbed child created false allegations during a hypothermic episode, and that an unstable veteran with PTSD manufactured evidence to satisfy his own need for meaning after a failed military career. Declan felt the old shame trying to surface, but Alara squeezed his fingers and he stayed still. Day 4 brought Dr. Lillian Frost to the stand. I examined Harrison Whitmore 2 weeks before his death. Dr. Frost testified, her voice steady despite obvious nerves. He presented with symptoms consistent with aconite poisoning: dizziness, weakness, cardiac arrhythmia. I ran a toxicology panel that came back negative, but aconite is notoriously difficult to detect after 72 hours. Did you voice your concerns? Foster asked. I refused to sign his death certificate. I requested an autopsy, and I preserved blood samples against protocol because I believed he was being poisoned. What happened to those samples? I kept them for 8 months. Then I had them tested by an independent laboratory. They showed aconite levels of 47 nanograms per milliliter. Lethal dose is 20. The defense cross-examined aggressively, suggesting contamination, improper storage, falsified results. But Dr. Frost held firm. Day 7 brought the FBI toxicologist who'd examined the exhumed bodies of Roland Ashford and Duncan Whitmore. Both bodies showed elevated aconite levels in bone marrow, which preserves toxins longer than soft tissue, the toxicologist explained. The levels were consistent with poisoning administered over several months, exactly matching the pattern we saw in Harrison Whitmore. Day 9 brought the audio engineer who authenticated Harrison's recordings. The voice patterns match Harrison Whitmore's known recordings with 99.7% certainty, the engineer testified. The background noise signatures confirm the recordings were made in the Ashford estate, and the timestamps are consistent with the dates encoded in the microchip. These recordings are authentic. Foster played 5 of the 53 recordings for the jury. 5 times they heard Cordelia's voice confessing to murder with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Aconite is elegant. No one suspects poison when the symptoms mimic heart disease. Roland was so easy. Push him down the stairs, arrange his body to look like he fell, cry at the funeral. $180 million for 30 seconds of effort. The child is next. After a suitable mourning period, another accident, another tragedy, and another fortune. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of recorded evil. Day 12 was Alara's testimony. She walked to the witness stand in a blue dress her mother had bought for the occasion, looking impossibly small and impossibly brave. Declan wanted to stop this, wanted to spare her the trauma of reliving what Cordelia had done. But Alara had insisted. Daddy would want me to tell the truth. Foster approached gently. Alara, can you tell us what happened on the night of February 14th? Alara's voice was quiet but steady. Aunt Cordelia said she wanted to show me something in the basement. A surprise for Mommy. So I followed her down, and she opened the big refrigerator and said the surprise was inside. What did you do? I looked inside. It was dark. I couldn't see anything. Then Aunt Cordelia pushed me and closed the door, and I heard her put something against it so it wouldn't open. What happened next? It got really cold. I tried to push the door, but it wouldn't move. I screamed, but nobody heard, and Aunt Cordelia came back after a while. I could hear her outside. She said, "You'll die like your daddy. Just go to sleep. It won't hurt much." How long were you in the refrigerator? I don't know. It felt like forever. I got really tired and really cold, and I couldn't feel my fingers. I thought I was going to die. Ilara's voice cracked. Then Uncle Declan found me. And Shadow, they saved me. The cross-examination was brutal. Whitfield suggested Alara had imagined the conversation with Cordelia during hypothermia. Suggested she'd climbed into the refrigerator, playing hide-and-seek. Suggested her uncle had coached her testimony. Alara's voice got quieter but never wavered. I'm not lying. Aunt Cordelia tried to kill me, just like she killed Daddy. Day 14 was Declan's testimony. He took the stand in his dress blues, the uniform he hadn't worn since his discharge, the one he'd almost thrown away a dozen times but kept for reasons he couldn't articulate. Foster walked him through the timeline. Finding Shadow, tracking the dog to the Ashford estate, discovering Alara, the investigation, the recordings. Then came the defense's turn. Whitfield pulled out a document and handed it to Declan. Mr. Thorne, is this your medical record from the Department of Veterans Affairs? Declan recognized it. His PTSD diagnosis. Depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Everything private made public. Yes. It says here you were diagnosed with severe PTSD following a mission in Afghanistan where 8 of your teammates died. Is that correct? Yes. It says you've had recurring nightmares, panic attacks, and according to your therapist, quote, expressed desire to die to be with fallen comrades. Is that correct? Yes. It also says you've been prescribed antipsychotics and antidepressants, that you isolated yourself in a remote cabin, that you refused contact with family and friends. Would you say you were mentally stable when you decided to investigate my client? Foster objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury had heard enough to wonder if Declan was a reliable witness or a broken veteran seeing conspiracies where none existed. Whitfield played his trump card, a recording from one of Declan's therapy sessions obtained through legal subpoena. Declan's voice rough with emotion. I want to kill someone, anyone. I want to make someone pay for what happened to my team. The therapist's voice. That's a normal response to survivor's guilt, Declan. But we need to work through these violent thoughts in a healthy way. Declan, I don't want to work through them. I want to act on them. The recording stopped. Whitfield looked at the jury. Does that sound like a man motivated by justice or a man motivated by his own psychological need for violence? Declan sat in the witness box knowing how bad this looked, knowing Cordelia's lawyers had twisted his lowest moments into weapons against him. Foster stood for redirect. Mr. Thorne, when did that therapy session take place? 7 months ago, 2 weeks after I was discharged. And did you ever act on those violent thoughts? No? Well, why not? Because saying you want to do something and actually doing it are different things. I was angry. I was broken. But I knew the difference between venting to a therapist and actually hurting someone. When you found evidence that Cordelia Ashford had murdered 3 people and tried to murder your niece, did you kill her? No. Did you harm her in any way? No. What did you do? I gathered evidence. I contacted law enforcement. I built a case because that's what justice looks like. Not revenge, not violence, justice. Foster turned to the jury. Mr. Thorne may struggle with PTSD, but he knows the difference between right and wrong, between legal action and vigilante violence. And when he had the opportunity to act on those dark thoughts the defense attorney just played for you, he chose the law. He chose justice, just like he's asking you to do now. Bennett Cross testified for the prosecution on day 16 disbarred, but redeemed his voice steady as he explained how he'd helped Declan gather the evidence that ended Cordelia's reign. The trial moved to closing arguments. 3 hours of legal rhetoric that boiled down to a simple question. Did the evidence prove beyond reasonable doubt that Cordelia Ashford was a murderer? The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Declan spent those hours in a coffee shop across from the courthouse, shadow at his feet, Alara playing on a tablet Natalie had given her. Waiting, not talking, just existing in the space between accusation and verdict. His phone rang. Wells, they're coming back. Verdict is in. The courtroom was packed when they returned. Media, families of Cordelia's victims, spectators who'd followed the trial like a drama series. All of them silent as the judge took his seat. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood, a man in his 60s, former military by his bearing, who'd sat through 3 weeks of testimony without showing emotion. We have your honor. On count 1, the murder of Roland Ashford. How do you find? We find the defendant guilty. Cordelia's lawyer started to object, but the foreman continued. On count 2, the murder of Duncan Whitmore, we find the defendant guilty. Cordelia's mask was cracking now, the perfect composure slipping into something harder, colder. On count 3, the murder of Harrison Whitmore, we find the defendant guilty. Natalie sobbed beside Declan, 8 months of grief finding release. On count 4, the attempted murder of Alara Whitmore, we find the defendant guilty. Alara's small hand gripped Declan's with crushing force. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just breathed deep, shuddering breaths that released 6 months of terror she'd been holding inside. It's over, Declan whispered. You're safe now, forever. I know, Alara said, because you didn't quit. The courtroom erupted. Cordelia stood, face transformed into something ugly and raw. I deserve that money, she screamed. I earned it. I married those pathetic men. I tolerated their boring lives. I gave them the best years of my beauty. That money is mine. Bailiffs moved to restrain her, but she kept screaming 25 years of carefully maintained pretense, shattering completely. You can't do this. I have judges. I have senators. I own this system. You can't take what's mine. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. Mrs. Ashford, you will control yourself or you will be removed from this courtroom. But Cordelia was beyond control, beyond calculation, beyond the performance she'd maintained for a quarter century. I killed them. Yes, I poisoned all 3 of them. And I'd do it again. They were weak, stupid. They deserved to die for being so easily manipulated. The stenographer's fingers flew over the keyboard, recording every word of the confession Cordelia's lawyers had spent 3 weeks trying to prevent. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge looked at Cordelia with the kind of disgust usually reserved for the worst humanity had to offer. Cordelia Ashford, you have been found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. You killed for money. You killed without remorse. You tried to kill a child. The law allows me to impose consecutive life sentences. I am doing so. You will spend the rest of your natural life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Cordelia said nothing, just stared at the judge with empty eyes, the mask gone completely revealing nothing underneath but void. They led her away in handcuffs and leg irons, the woman who'd been worth $920 million, now worth nothing but a number in the federal prison system. 72 hours after sentencing, Cordelia was found dead in her cell at FCY in Florence. The official cause was suicide, a bedsheet torn into strips tied to the ventilation grate neck broken from the drop. But she left something behind, an 18-page handwritten confession that detailed crimes no one had suspected. 6 additional murders over 30 years. A college roommate who'd inherited a trust fund, a business partner who'd wanted to dissolve their company, an elderly aunt worth $40 million, 2 previous boyfriends with life insurance policies, and a woman whose name Cordelia never learned, killed simply because she witnessed Cordelia purchasing aconite from an overseas supplier. 9 confirmed murders, 30 years of evil. $1.3 billion stolen from people whose only crime was trusting the wrong woman. The confession's final line was pure Cordelia. I regret nothing but failure. 3 weeks before the center's dedication, Declan attended a different ceremony, Fort Logan National Cemetery. Section 42, a new monument of black granite 6 feet tall, 3 feet wide. Engraved at the top, in memory of fallen warriors. Below that, 17 names. Military working dogs declared killed in action over the past decade. Dogs whose deaths had been lies covering crimes like Cordelia's. Ghost, MWD 7823, Shadow, MWD 8471, Ranger, MWD 6541, Titan, MWD 9104, Bruiser, MWD 572, 9, Apollo, MWD 88832, Zeus, MWD 7156, Rocco, MWD 6498, Max, MWD 9271, Duke, MWD 58843, Hunter, MWD 7625, Bear, MWD 8394, Spike, MW 6157, Ace, and MWD 9508, Gunner, MW 7283, Odin, MWD 8641, Maverick, MW 597082. Commander Reeves spoke at the ceremony, voice rough with emotion. These dogs served with honor, died or were reported to have died in service to a nation that failed to protect them. Today we acknowledge that failure, and we promise never again. Declan stepped forward when Reeves finished. He'd prepared no speech, but words came anyway. 6 months ago, one of these dogs scratched at my door in a blizzard. He'd been shot, frozen, dying, but he refused to quit because he had a mission. Declan's hand rested on Shadow's head. That mission saved a little girl's life, exposed a serial killer, and reminded a broken seal why he kept fighting. He pulled Ghost's collar from his pocket, worn leather metal tags dulled by time and sand and blood. This belonged to Ghost, my partner, my brother. He died 6 months ago in the same ambush that Shadow survived. Declan's voice cracked. I carried this collar like a burden, like proof I should have died with him. He walked to the monument, found Ghost's engraved name, hung the collar on a hook beneath it. But Ghost didn't die so I could follow him. He died so I could live, so I could be here when Shadow needed me, when Alara needed me. Declan looked at the 17 names. These dogs didn't die in vain. They died protecting us, and we honor them by protecting each other. Shadow stood beside him, pressed against his leg, and howled once, long, mournful. A sound that carried across the cemetery and made everyone present feel the weight of loss and the power of survival. 6 months later, Declan stood in Denver's Civic Center Park, watching the dedication of the Harrison Whitmore Center for Child Safety, a building funded by $300 million from Harrison's estate, designed to protect children from domestic predators and provide resources for abuse investigations. The plaque beside the entrance read, "Guarded by love, defended by courage, rescued by shadow." Alara stood beside him. 11 now healthy, thriving, the nightmares fading slowly but steadily. Natalie was there too, along with Dr. Frost, Agent Wells, and 100 people whose lives had been touched by Cordelia's crimes. Declan gave a short speech because public speaking wasn't his strength, and everyone knew it. Harrison Whitmore never met me, but he trusted me to protect his daughter if something happened to him. Kyle Brennan never met me either, but he trained his dog to find me because he knew I wouldn't quit. Declan's hand rested on Shadow's head. The dog wore a vest, now not tactical gear, but the simple blue vest of a certified therapy dog. This building exists because two men I never knew believed I was someone worth believing in. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that faith. He stepped back and let Alara cut the ribbon, cameras flashing, people applauding. Later, much later, after the crowds had gone and the sun was setting over the mountains, Declan drove to Fort Logan National Cemetery. Kyle Brennan's grave was simple. White marble, military honors, a flag that would be replaced every Memorial Day by people who remembered. Declan knelt beside the grave, placed both hands on the cold marble. Kyle's name was carved, deep, permanent, real. "I finished what you started," Declan said, voice breaking. Shadow made sure of it. "He's doing good work now. Therapy dog for kids who've been through trauma. Turns out he's really good at helping people heal." Shadow pressed his nose against Kyle's name, whined once, then sat at attention. Military posture. Final salute to a fallen handler. "You trained him well. Trained him to find me even though we never met. Trusted me with your mission, with your partner, with finishing what you couldn't." Declan's voice was barely a whisper now. "I don't know if I deserve that trust, but I tried to earn it." Alara appeared beside him carrying flowers she'd picked from the park. "Was he nice?" she asked, placing the flowers on Kyle's grave. "I never met him, but he saved your life by training Shadow to find me, so yeah, I think he was nice." They stood in silence for a moment, three survivors paying respects to a fourth who'd made their survival possible. Then Declan walked to Ghost Monument, the collar still hanging where he'd placed it months ago. He touched the worn leather one more time. "I carried this for 6 months like proof I should be dead," Declan said. "Now I'm leaving it here as proof I chose to live. For you, for Shadow, for Alara, for everyone still fighting." Shadow pressed against Declan's leg, and for the first time since the ambush, Declan felt something other than grief when he thought about Ghost. He felt gratitude. "Rest easy, Ghost," Declan whispered. "Your mission's complete, and so is mine." They walked back to the car as the sun set, completely painting the Colorado sky in shades of orange and red and purple. Shadow sat in the back seat with Alara, the girl's head resting on the dog's shoulder, both of them peaceful. Declan thought about the cabin he'd lived in 6 months ago, the isolation, the pills, the loaded gun he'd kept in the bedside table for the day he finally found the courage to use it. That man was gone, not healed, not fixed, but different, better. Because a dog had scratched at his door in a blizzard and refused to let him quit. Because a little girl had needed him to be more than his brokenness. Because two men he'd never met had believed he was worth saving. 6 months ago, Declan Thorne had been waiting to die. Now he was learning to live. The car pulled into the driveway of the small house Declan had bought near Fort Carson. Not a cabin in the wilderness, not isolation, a home. With neighbors and a yard where Shadow could run and a room where Alara could sleep safely when she visited. "Uncle Declan?" Alara asked as they got out of the car. "Yeah, kiddo. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for giving me a reason not to." Shadow barked once, tail wagging, and led them both inside, where dinner was waiting, where Natalie was visiting, where photographs of Harrison and Ghost and Kyle hung on walls alongside pictures of new memories being made, where broken things had learned to become stronger together, where the last Guardia had finally found peace, and somewhere in the darkness that was receding slowly but surely, Ghost and Kyle Brennan were watching, proud of the operator who'd finally found his way home, proud of the Mo who'd completed his final mission, proud of the child who'd survived evil and chosen courage. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. There would always be more predators, more evil hiding behind perfect smiles. But there would also be more guardians. More people who refused to quit when quitting would be easier. And that was enough. That was everything.